Welcome. Can you hear me in the back? Yes, good. All right. So as Amy so eloquently mentioned, today's class is about four rules regarding winning the game of life. If you have any other rules to add to these four rules, please feel free to speak your mind. But what I try to do tonight is really gather as many sources as possible from Judaism and really learn from them, draw as many lessons from them, and then in a way box them into four boxes, because I do believe that these four boxes give us the perfect ingredients to lead a successful and meaningful life. But before we look at these very sources, I do want to begin with a story about a man by the name of, I don't want to offend anyone here, Larry. Is there any Larry here? Okay, man by the name of Larry, who was in love with his cat and with his mother. And he decided one day to go on vacation, but he didn't know what to do with his cat, so he called his brother Bob and he said, Bob, listen, you know I'm in love with my cat, I don't trust anyone, maybe I trust you with my cat, I want to go on vacation. Do you mind watching my cat? And at the same time, please watch Mom. She needs to be watched, she needs to be attended to. Bob said, yeah, not a problem. I'll watch your cat and I'll stay at Mom's during your vacation. Larry goes on vacation. After a week, he calls Bob. And he said, Bob, you know what my first question is going to be? How's the cat doing? Bob said, I'm sorry to tell you, the cat fell off the roof and died. Larry's mad. He says to Bob, how dare you share these news like that? Don't you know this can cause a heart attack? I need to hear news like that gradually. First say the cat is on the roof. Then a few days go by and you say the cat is stuck on the roof. Then a few days go by when I call again and say, you know, the cat fell off the roof, we don't exactly know what happened to him. A few days go by, then you can say the cat died. It will be gradual and it will be less shocking, and therefore I'll be more receptive to these news. Larry then says to Bob, Bob, how's Mom doing? Excuse me. Bob said, Mom is on the roof. But I'm reminded, ladies and gentlemen, of this story because I think it speaks to one of the essential rules that we're about to tackle. And that is the rule not just of how we share news about others, but also about how we share news about ourselves, how we go about life in general. And this particular rule I actually learned from not necessarily a verse, a passage, or even a word in the Bible, in the Torah, but rather I learned this from what's called a trop, which means a musical note. If you've been to synagogue, you know that the Torah is sung every Shabbat with very specific notes. These notes can be found in every Torah book, and some notes look very simple, some are much more sophisticated, just like musical notes. But there is one note that appears only 4 times in the Torah. That note is called shalshelet, and it comes to indicate something very specific. But shalshelet has a very interesting noise and maybe even very disturbing noise. If you have a musical ear, you might not enjoy the shalshelet too much. I would say it sounds like a scratch on a CD, right? You've heard of a scratch on a CD? So it scratches once and it repeats itself and repeats itself. You say, fine, move on. But that's the note that appears again 4 times in the entire Torah. Where this note appears, I think indicates something about each and every one of those 4 passages. It tells the whole story. Where does it appear? In these 4 instances in front of us. We'll read the 4 instances, and then I want to develop the idea here shared by these 4 instances and go to rule 1. Of course, as I've always said, please feel free to speak your mind. If you have any questions, ask them. If you have any disagreements, please share them. But I want to hear from as many people as possible. I believe that that's what learning is about. Learning is not just one-way street. Learning is a two-way street. That's the only way learning can really come about. But that's why the word for Hebrew, the word in Hebrew for learning and teaching, as we've said, is the same word. Because when you teach, you learn, and when you learn, you're also teaching through your questions. So please speak your mind, but also let's have different volunteers read the references of today. Who wants to read about this first shalshelet, the first time this musical note appears in the Torah? Anyone? The first shalshelet. Please. Go ahead. Howard, go for it.
First shalshelet appears in Genesis 19:16 in the story of Lot. Lot had separated from his uncle Abraham and settled in Sodom. There he had assimilated into the local population. His daughters had married local men. Then 2 visitors came to tell him to leave as God was about to destroy the city. Yet Lot hesitates, and above the word for hesitates,
Right.
Shalshelet.
Okay, good. So that's the first time it appears. I'll speak about this in a second, but the scene is clear. Lot, the nephew of Abraham, does not know whether to follow God's command and leave his town. After all, him and his family were well established in that town, and he doesn't want to move. Like it happens to many of us. We don't like change. We don't want to go to the unknown. That's what happens to Lot. He hesitates. On the word hesitates, there is that shalshelet, which by the way looks like a zigzag. The second shalshelet appears elsewhere. There appears another story regarding Abraham. Does anyone want to read? Please, Anne, go for it.
The second shalshelet occurs in Genesis 24:12, when Abraham asks his servant Eliezer to find a wife for Isaac his son. He then travels to the city of Haran from Canaan. Arriving at the town's well, he proposes a test. The woman who comes to draw water offers some to the traveler, and in addition gives water to his camels, will be the one chosen by God for his master's son. Over the "and he said," tradition has placed a shalshelet.
Right, and he said, speaking of his prayer to God, there is a shalshelet. Eliezer wants to find a woman for Isaac, for his master's son. And when he prays, he's also hesitating, and the note shalshelet appears there too. I'll get back to again this note, but let's speak about the third and the fourth instance. Third shalshelet. Again, to put things in perspective, please. Go ahead, Anna.
The third shalshelet brings us to Egypt and the life of Joseph. Sold by his brothers as a slave, he is now working in the house of the eminent Egyptian Potiphar. Left alone in the house with his master's wife, he finds himself the object of her desire. He is handsome. She wants to sleep with her.
With him, sorry. Yeah.
To sleep with her. He refuses. To do such a thing, he says, would be to betray his master, her husband. It would be a sin against God. Yet over, quote, he refused, unquote, is a shalshelet.
Okay, that's the third shalshelet in the Torah. Joseph, by the way, was very tempted by the wife of Potiphar. Just imagine, he was sold by his own brothers. He's a lonely human being. His family had abandoned him. He's sold to Egyptian slaves, and they find himself finally getting the attention of people. He hadn't felt the love of people for a long time. Now, if he does commit this sin, no one will know. It will just advance him. It will be good for his career. So he's very tempted. He's seduced very strongly. Yet he refuses. But when the Torah tells us that he refused, there is that zigzag note on top of he refused. Interesting. By the way, how did he refuse the Talmud? I don't want to bring the whole Talmud here, the whole page. But why did he refuse? Apparently at that moment, when he was about to really transgress this sin, the image of his father came to him. And it spoke to him. He had this revelation. And his father was telling him, are you going to erase your name from our family? Are you going to go down in history as a person who could not control his emotions? And Joseph stopped. He refused. But again, not without the shalshelet. And then the fourth shalshelet appears in a different context. Let's read about this, and I want to speak about what the shalshelet really conveys. Does anyone else want to read? Please, go ahead, Bob.
The fourth shalshelet appears in Leviticus 8:13. For 7 days Moses inaugurated his brother Aaron and his sons as the new priests in the sanctuary. During these 7 days, it was Moses, not Aaron, who was performing the priestly services in the tabernacle. Each day Moses offered a bull and 2 rams. On the last day, too, Moses performed these rites. The Shalshedet was designated on the word Vayishet, and he, Moses,
Right, and he slaughtered. Good. So on that word, again, you find the Shalshelet. This is the time now, the last time really, that Moses was going to bring a sacrifice. From that point on, it was his brother's duty. At that very last time, when he brings that very last sacrifice, he slaughters the animal, but there's the Shalshelet. This Shalshelet, my friend, I think reveals something that we all experience in life. And that's ambivalence, hesitation. In these 4 instances, these 4 people are hesitating. How should we proceed in life? Joseph doesn't know what to do. Should I? Should I not? Eliezer didn't know what to do, the servant of Abraham trying to find a wife for Isaac. He didn't know what to do because, as the Midrash tells us, he actually wanted Isaac not to marry a woman that he will pick, but to marry his own daughter. So he doesn't know, should I fulfill the mission of my master or not? He's hesitating. For the first Shalshelet also, Lot, should I leave my town? Should not I leave my town? Moses, the last Shalshelet, he's saying to himself, should I really give it away to Aaron? I like doing this. This feels good. Maybe Aaron shouldn't continue. Maybe I should be the one to continue to do this job. So he's hesitating. Shalshelet again applies to the hesitations we have in life. The problem is this. Some people stay in that mode for a long time. For a very long time. We're in that mode between fear and conviction. Between knowing very clearly what we ought to do, yet staying with what we feel like doing. And we don't always know how to take those decisions, how to follow our convictions in order to advance and grow in life. And I think that more than anything, what all of these 4 Shalshelets are telling us is that if a person is to live, if a person is to be a Joseph or a Moses or an Eliezer or a Lot that eventually goes on with his life, then a person has to grow. Now, I often say to teenagers especially that, unfortunately, there are 2 words that we love, but they just don't go together. It's like water and oil. The first word is convenience. We love convenience. Everything today, every tech idea is based on convenience, consumer empowerment, they say, and so on, just to make life much more easy, much more convenient. But I think that this word doesn't fit well with yet another word that we strive for. And that's the word meaning. Meaningful. To have meaning in life very often demands work, demands growth, demands labor. That's life. If we do not walk, we can't go from point A to point B. If we do not climb, we can't go from earth to heaven. It demands work, it demands growth. That's what life is about. But very often we're hesitating. We're in this mode of Shalshelet and we don't know what to do. And here I think the Torah conveys to us, I think the first rule again, and that is that we all ought to grow, even though it might be sometimes, or maybe most of the times, inconvenient. I'll tell you the beautiful story of the 2 brothers. Some of you may have heard of them, but Rabbi Zusha and Rabbi Elimelech, who were 2 brothers, who were very interesting characters, who actually decided to go on a road trip. I know people here go on a road trip from the East Coast to the West Coast, and vice versa. They went on a road trip, this is before cars, all over Poland, to experience community and also to come out of their comfort zone. At one of their stops, they were accused of some crime that they didn't commit. So the police threw them into jail, into prison. There, as they were in prison in that waiting room, Reb Zusha, one of the 2 brothers, begins to cry. And his brother says, "Why are you crying?" And Zusha says, "Because look, this room is packed with about 50 inmates, and it stinks. And it stinks not just because it's stuffy, but because there's a bucket there that serves as the restroom for everyone. We can't even go to the restroom properly. But that's not even what bothers me, Zusha says. What really bothers me is that in a place that stinks, we can't pray. It's not respectful to God. So this will be the first time in my life he tells his brother that a day will go by and I won't pray. I'm not allowed to, it stinks. So Elimelech tells him something so beautiful, so powerful. He says to him, Zusha, 1 second. Who's telling you that you're not allowed to pray? Who made that rule up? God. The God he commanded. So just like you connect to God through prayer, you can connect to God by following his rule of not praying. So you can connect to God by not praying, because you're not praying because you're following his rule. So you're also connecting to God. Zusha says, you know what, you're right. I am following his rule by not praying, so I'm connecting to God, maybe in a different way, not in the way I expected, not through prayer, but in a different way. And as a Hasidic Jew, he began to dance. Soon enough, everyone in that room was dancing. The warden heard a noise, and he said, what's happening? In my prison, people are dancing and are singing and are happy. How could that be? He goes down to inspect what happened. He walks into the room and he sees a bunch of people dancing. He says, then what are you dancing for? And they point to the two brothers and said, it's them. Why? He says, well, it's complicated, Warren, but there was a relationship that they had with God pre-bucket and then a relationship post-bucket. There was a relationship that they had before they had a bucket. They could pray. Now after they have a deeper connection, they're connected to God with a different channel. The warden becomes very upset. He goes to the middle of the room, takes the bucket and throws it out the window. The dance stops, but then Elimelech tells his brother Zusha, now you can pray. But that's a powerful story, one of my favorites, because I think it speaks to this idea of life that very often we hesitate because we think, now we're not going to achieve greatness. Now my situation is better and maybe I'm a little bit lazy. But we have to understand that there are so many ways to connect to God, and sometimes not ways that we envision. But even in the ways of darkness, there is light. Even when we think that we're experiencing despair, there is hope. There is an opportunity to connect to God everywhere. And therefore, hesitance can happen. It's the human condition. But it can't block us. It can't paralyze us. Because that's the first rule. To live is to grow, even if it's inconvenient. You know, I'll tell you, one of the main differences, in my humble opinion, please feel free to disagree, between this generation, and I teach, I teach a lot. I teach kids and teenagers, as mentioned before, so I see it. But this generation and the previous generation, please feel free to disagree, is that if you would stop a person in the street 50 years ago, here on Scottsdale Road, or maybe Scottsdale Road didn't exist 50 years ago, but on Times Square, and you would stop someone and you would say to them, excuse me, what is your big dream in life? I think they would tell you, my big dream in life is to be the richest man on the planet, to be the best scientist, the best doctor. Today, stop someone in the street, and they might tell you, what's my dream in life? I don't know, I want to have a suburban life, a suburban wife, a suburban house, suburban car. They're very compromised. And it hurts me, because I think the only way we can grow in life is to have dreams that we walk to, that we climb to, that we aspire to, that we work for. And the higher the dreams, the higher the life. But if those dreams are not there, if we just settle for convenience, for what is comfortable, then we won't be able to live fully. And I think this is exactly what Moses is being told here by God. It's just it's worth reading, a beautiful verse, where Moses is pleading to God, please let me enter the promised land. I've led this nation for 40 years in the desert. It's now my turn to enter the promised land with them. God says no. God in fact says, Moses, it's too much for you. Now forgive me, that's a little cruel. Moses was one of the most dedicated leaders you'll ever find in history. God doesn't grant him that request, and not only that, he says to him as if to play with him, it's too much for you? What does that mean? God is telling Moses, his loyal student, his loyal son, his loyal servant, you can call him however you want, It's too much for you? And let's jump to the second page here. Actually, sorry, to the bottom of the first page. Why is God implying these words? This is too much for you. Let's read why God used that sentence. Who wants to read the bottom reference, please? Go ahead. Please, Rick, go for it.
This is too much for you. These are the exact words that Moses himself used some 4 decades earlier during the meeting of Korah. There, a Levite by the name of Korah, together with 250 leaders of the community, staged a rebellion against Moses and Aaron. These men tested the hierarchy among the Israelite community. The entire congregation folded, they said, "Why do you exalt yourself over the congregation of God?" Moses responded with faithful words, "Too much for you, sons of Levi."
Right, so God wasn't just using those words, too much for you, just because he wanted to play with Moses, but rather because those were the words that Moses himself used when there was a rebellion that was staged against him, a rebellion that said to Moses, "Who do you think you are, Moses? You're not the only holy person in this nation. There's many more. All of us are holy. You shouldn't be the only leader. We should all be leaders." Moses then responded to those rebellious bunch that this is too much for you. Don't think that you can become leaders. God apparently wasn't happy with Moses' response. He's telling Moses, you used those words too much for you. In other words, what you did, paralyzed. Every human being should have the highest of aspiration. It wasn't too much for them. Maybe the way they went about it to rebel against you was, the method they used was not right. But the desire itself, the yearning itself, is a positive one. Korach, that rebellion bunch, were right. Everyone should be holy. Everyone should have those dreams. We should all have the highest dreams. Now when Moses wants to enter the promised land, God said, "Remember you said too much for you? I'm going to tell you too much for you. This is also too much for you. They had a dream and you squashed it. You now have a dream and I'll squash it because of what you did." It's very harsh, very, as we said, cruel. But I think it's very powerful. When we have dreams, we ought to follow them. When we hear our children with dreams, we ought to encourage them to follow them. That's rule number 1. To live is to grow. I'll conclude just with a story that comes to mind, but one of my stories I was most inspired by. But I heard it actually from a woman by the name of Miriam Swerdlove. Miriam Swerdlove was a young 22-year-old woman who found herself stuck on a Friday afternoon at the Detroit airport. I know some of you are from Detroit, so you might imagine the scene with a little more clarity. But she was stuck on a Friday afternoon. She's an observant Jewish woman. She keeps the Sabbath. She didn't know what to do. The flight was canceled. And they told her, "You might be able to catch the next flight, but it will get there back to New York where she lived just maybe an hour before Shabbat, so we're not sure you might be able to make it." And she doesn't know what to do. She's stuck. She calls her rabbi. Her rabbi was the late Rabbi Schneerson in New York. The secretary answers, and Miriam says to the secretary, "Please tell the rabbi, Rabbi Schneerson, that I'm stuck here in Detroit. I don't know what to do. Should I wait for the next flight? Should I try and find a family that will host me for Shabbat? I'm stuck." The secretary goes to the rabbi, and he comes back on the phone and he tells Miriam, the rabbi doesn't understand the word stuck. But doesn't he speak English? He doesn't understand the word stuck, so she goes back. "What do you mean, rabbi?" "I don't understand the word stuck," he says to the secretary to tell Miriam. So Miriam says, "Can you go again and clarify with the rabbi, please, what this means?" He went back and the rabbi explained, a Jew, a human being, is never stuck. If God puts you in that Detroit airport, it's for you to achieve something in that Detroit airport. You might feel stuck, but there's a mission awaiting you there. So act upon it. When Miriam heard those words, she was empowered with this new life, with this invigoration. She decided to smile at as many people as possible, to make as many people joyful as possible, even to find Jews to give them Shabbat candles so that they can light the Shabbat candles that Friday with her. She was charged with the mission because the Rebbe had taught her that no one is stuck. It's true not just when we're stuck at Detroit airport. It's true also in life. We feel stuck sometimes. I know that's part of what life is about. But we have to continue to grow. We have to continue to dream the highest dreams. And only in that sense can we truly live a meaningful life. Number two, rule number two is as we grow, as we achieve and aspire for those loftiest dreams, we have to remember that they can only be achieved one step at a time. Very often we chew too much, and then, of course, bothers our digestive system. It's true in life. We take too much upon ourselves, and we often think that life is an all or nothing game, but it's not. It's not. Judaism definitely is not an all or nothing game. I always say that the only definition that can apply to Jews is not Reform Jews and conservative Jews and Reconstructionist Jews and Orthodox Jews and you name it. Today are so many different labels. I don't think any of those labels are right because they box you, they paralyze you. But I think the only type of label that we can apply to Jews is growing. You're either a growing Jew or you're a non-growing Jew. But that growth has to be step by step. I've seen, unfortunately, too many people have taken too much upon themselves in Judaism, and it was too much. They retreated to even way behind from where from where they came. But sometimes we chew too much, and we have to remember that it's a step by step life that we are living. Yes, please.
Would you say the point is it's a journey and not the destiny?
Very good. I love that. That's right. It's a journey, and or in other words, I would say the journey is the destination, right? Not just the destination. That's right. That's right. Now, I'll tell you, it's one of the books I think that are must read. But there's a great book called Let There Be Water. Has anyone heard of it? Let There Be Water by Seth Cohen. Let There Be Water speaks of the water revolution led by Israel. Out of all countries, this tiny little country that suffers from water shortage almost every year has led the world in this water revolution, in this new way of irrigating plants and farms and kibbutzim and so on. But how was it? How did it start? It was inspired by a guy named Simcha Blas. Simcha Blas lived in the 1930s in Israel, and one day he was a young man. He was walking on the street, and he sees that there are multiple trees. All of them are the same height and more or less with the same dryness, except for one. One is particularly high and it's flourishing and blossoming. And he's asking himself, how did this happen? And then he sees that right by the tall, beautiful tree, there was a broken pipe. And that broken pipe dripped drops of water, one after the other, on the tree, which of course nourished it with more water, and therefore it grew so much more. He said to himself, I think I want to do something. But then life got in the way, and it wasn't until 1955, 25 years later, there's a big water shortage in Israel, and he says to himself, I remember what I saw 25 years earlier, maybe we can apply that. And he decided to apply that to all of the irrigation system in his kibbutz where he came from. And he said that they should create pipes. They drip water one drop at a time, because he realized that many of those pipes were wasting too much water. They were gushing water, it wasn't helping the tree, wasn't helping the water supplies in Israel. So he said one drop at a time. He created the system, and very quickly it took off. The whole of Israel was using it, and now much of the world is using it. But he learned a lesson, and I'll take your question about. But he learned a lesson at that point, and he writes this in this book by Seth Cohen. He learned a lesson that that's what life is about. We think that we should water ourselves with a gush of water. But that's not how we grow. We grow one drop at a time. As we say here, one mitzvah at a time, one good deed at a time. That's how we grow. And that's, I think, rule number 2. As we grow in life, remember, it's one step at a time. Yes, Bob?
So when you talk about one step at a time, one journey, destination, how does one determine what their purpose is to achieve this?
That's a big question. I think in another Jewish class we spoke about achieving our purpose, and I call it the POP rule. I know some of you know it already, but POPP. I think if we follow this map, we can achieve our purpose. I'll say it very briefly and concisely. The first P stands for personality. One has to know who they are. Everyone has his own unique skills and talents and temperaments and so on. We have different personalities. I think God created every human being on the planet, the 7 billion of us, but every one of us is different. And we have to find out who we are. So that's the first letter, personality. Then O stands for opportunities. We have to be open to the opportunities of life, whether it's opportunities of helping the homeless in the street today, opportunities that we don't know were going to exist, but they all of a sudden showed up. Or maybe bigger opportunities, but we always have to be attentive to life and ask what life wants from us, not just what we want from it. Number 3 is places. I think the places we go to are part of our purpose. God sends us to the Bahamas, not just for vacation, but maybe also to achieve something there. Who knows? Maybe to uplift a broken spirit. Maybe to, again, think of an idea, get an inspiration that will create an invention like Simcha Blas. Who knows? But places we go to are part of a purpose. And number 4, fourth letter P again, is people. The people that we meet, I think, are a part of our purpose too. Some people are there for a brief moment in our lives, but they were there for a reason. And some people come and stay. Like Jewish guests, they come and stay. But they are there also for a purpose, maybe for them to learn something from us learn something from them. But that's how we achieve our purpose in life. But once we figure that out, then we have to launch this growth. And this growth again has to happen one step at a time. We learned this from yet a different source, maybe we won't read it. But I think that, let's go to Rabbi Menachem Schneerson, the second source under Rule 2. And that speaks of this big idea. Rabbi Akiva, and this speaks of the source that quoted Rabbi Akiva, but I want to learn, I want to connect you to the lesson. Does anyone want to read the second source? Yes, please, go for it.
Okay. Rabbi Akiva is telling us that a Jew must know that God values and cherishes every single mitzvah that a Jew does. God embraces every act of change. God treasures every effort to bridges to oneself and to others. Even if we end up correcting just one thing, God accepts it fully and purifies us. Whatever we manage to accomplish, any step we manage to take forward towards a better, more inspired, godly life, is infinitely treasured by God, who can purify even the one who still remains impure. It may be one small step by man, but a giant step from God.
Right, I think the words speak for themselves, and they're beautiful, and again, that's the way growth needs to happen. I think it's the only way growth can happen. There's a different source here, which is a very interesting one, but you know, the Talmud is very inquisitive and it asks almost every question and doesn't leave us any stone unturned. But in the Tractate of Kiddushin that speaks about marriage, it asks the question of as follows: if a person marries someone else in condition, if I marry my wife in condition that I am a multi-millionaire and I have 0 cents in my bank account, is the marriage valid or not? Good question, right? What do you say? It's valid? Anyone? Yes?
You could get it.
Well, I lied. So because the marriage was founded on a lie, it's not a valid marriage. And the same goes with, you know, if I married my wife in condition that, for example, I'm blonde and I'm not blonde, the marriage is not valid because the basis of it was a lie. But listen to this. If I marry my wife, if I say to Esther, my wife, I will marry you, before we got married, I will marry you in condition that I am completely righteous, that I'm a saint. Now, the Talmud says, even if I am the opposite, a complete sinner, the marriage is valid. But one second, it's not consistent with what we say. The reason that on which the marriage was founded was also a lie. I'm not righteous. And the Talmud says something fascinating. It says, no, it's valid. You know why? Because at that moment, when I said to my wife, to my future wife, you should know that I'm completely righteous, maybe I was. How could it be? Because maybe at that moment, I had the thought of becoming completely righteous. That thought in and of itself transformed my entire essence. It made me completely righteous. The thought itself only made me completely righteous. And therefore the marriage is valid because it wasn't founded on a lie, it was founded on truth. The thought transformed me. I think it's a very powerful thought. And by the way, that's Jewish law. It's not just a nice argument in the Talmud. It's Jewish law. But what does this mean? It means that sometimes all it takes is a good thought, a good, powerful intention of saying to ourselves, yes, I might be a complete sinner, but I take upon myself today to be righteous, to do good, one step at a time. It's just a thought. That's just the first step. But because of that first step, it transforms me. It turns me into a righteous individual. And again, I think it shares this powerful message that it's one step at a time. First the thought, then a deed, then another deed, then another deed, and then another deed, and eventually I'll get there. But at the very foundation, the thought again is what counts. That first step is what counts. You know, I lived in South Africa for quite a while. I grew up in South Africa from the age of 8 to the age of 13. Actually had the great privilege of bumping into Mandela in the street on the way to synagogue on Shabbat in 1992. But I remember when he came out of prison of Robbins Island after 27 years, some of you might remember that historic moment. But Nelson Mandela, speaking of him, has a great book. It's also, I think, a must read. It's called The Long Walk to Freedom. Just the title itself says it all. I think it is a long walk to freedom. Step after step after step. We can't achieve freedom in one shot, even though I know that's the generation we live in, where everything is instant gratification and so on. It doesn't exist that way in real life. It's one step at a time. Rule 3, to live is to believe in your soul. What does this mean? And I learned this from Midrash that speaks about the trees. And when the trees were created, okay, just imagine this, it's a very poetic image or scene. But when the trees were created, who likes trees here? Is anyone a farmer? Okay, good. All right. Who likes gardening, agriculture? Fine. So you might appreciate this if you do even more. But when the trees were created, they began to shiver. They trembled with fear. I know trees don't have emotions and so on. Maybe they do. The science that's being discovered today, but I think the Midrash is trying to convey a lesson more than anything else. Maybe it's a metaphor. But the trees began to shiver. Why did they shiver? Let's read the Midrash. Let's go to the very bottom of the second page here. On the first Tuesday of creation. Does anyone want to read? Please. Anyone else? Please, go ahead, Joel.
On the first day of creation, the earth and all that it contained was submerged. When the trees observed iron, the trees began to shudder at the prospect of being felled by metal axe blades. The trees understood that against a mighty iron axe, they had little chance to survive. Upon hearing the laments, the iron retorted, "Why are you trembling? As long as you don't provide the wood for the axes handles, you will remain immune from harm."
Right. So they began to travel because they saw the iron in the ground and they said, this iron is eventually going to cut us off. God said, 1 second. How's it going to cut you off? By creating an axe? But an axe can only be created with wood. The handle of an axe is made with wood. So if you don't provide the wood for that handle, the axe can't cut you off. I think this Midrash is again very, very powerful because what it teaches us is that very often fear is self-nurtured. We make up all of these great stories in our mind. But as long as we don't provide fuel for those fearful emotions, then nothing can cut us off. And one of the great rules of life, I think one of the great rules of Judaism is that we have to believe in ourselves. In fact, we start the day, and I would encourage everyone in this room to start the day the way the Jewish day starts. That is that as soon as you wake up in the morning, you say the Modeh Ani prayer. I thank you, God, for restoring my soul in me. And then we conclude that very short prayer, 12-word sentence, by saying, Rabbah emunatecha, great is your faithfulness. What are we speaking about? We say to God, and that's the way we start the day. Great is your faithfulness in us. You believe in us. You gave us a new day today, a new life. Some people don't wake up in the morning. God believes in us. So we ought to believe in ourselves. God gave us a new day. It means that He believes in what we can achieve that day. So why do we fill our minds with all of these emotions and all of these anxieties and fears? Now I know that some of them can't be controlled, and they need experts and medication and so on. But talking about the average emotion, very often we say, no, we're a failure. Tell you the story, and I don't know, I haven't verified it. I could through Snopes.com. That's where I verify my stories. I haven't verified this one. If you think it's false, please tell me. If you know it's false, tell me. But the beautiful story about Thomas Edison, who is it false? Is it true? The story about Thomas Edison, who became the inventor of the century in 1879. But when he was a young boy, they called him, I don't remember the exact, mentally disturbed or something like that. And at one point, they sent a letter home with him to his mother. Right? You know the story? Good. Is it true? Can anyone tell me that's true or not? It's true? Okay. All right. They sent a letter home with his mother. His mother opened the letter. Thomas was standing right next to her. And she begins to sob. And then Thomas says to his mother, what happened? What's wrong? What did they write to you? And she reads the letter saying, we're terribly sorry. We cannot accommodate your son anymore. He's a genius. He surpassed us all. Please try and find him a private teacher in order to continue his studies. That next day, he didn't go back to school. He was private tutored that whole year, and I think after that also. Many years go by. Thomas Edison's mother passes on. One day Thomas Edison is in his attic and he's looking through stuff and he finds that letter from the school. He opens it up and it reads as follows. Dear Mrs. Edison, your child is way too behind. We cannot accommodate him in school. He's too slow. You should put him in a mental institute. And then he realized, gosh, my mother changed the whole story upside down. But because she changed the whole story upside down, because she believed in my soul, because she believed in me, in my infinite potential, it made me Thomas Edison. If I had heard that opposite message, maybe I would have never made anything of my life. And very often that's the truth with our own lives, the way we relate to ourselves, not just to our children, but to our very selves. We say that's it. We're wasted, we're a failure, we're limited, we can't do this, we can't do that. The naysayers of the world will encourage us to say that too. But it's not true. The soul comes from God, we believe, and therefore it's infinite, and therefore also its potential is infinite, and we cannot allow the axes of life to cut us down, especially if we do not give them that wood. You know, that in the Kovno ghetto, I just read this a few days ago, but in the Kovno ghetto in 1940, as the Nazis were forming all these ghettos and assembling all these Jews to, of course, lead them afterwards to concentration camps and murder them. Such cruelty, but unfathomable cruelty. Doris can tell you more. Her mother was a heroine of our nation and survived Auschwitz and the Death March. And I look up to people like that infinitely. But in the Kovno ghetto, they had a morning prayer. They had, like we have, everyone is welcome, by the way, at our congregation every morning at 7 a.m. You're welcome to join us. But they had that at the Kovno ghetto. And one day the cantor stopped his prayer. And he said, gosh, part of the prayer is thanking God and saying, Hodu Hashem Kitov. Praise the Lord. I can't thank God under these horrific circumstances. Why should we thank God? And after asking that question and taking a long pause, he said, no, I'll continue. Because these evil Nazis can only imprison our bodies, but they can't imprison our soul. And as long as we can focus on that soul, then we ought to be thankful. that soul, despite all of its impediments and its obstacles and its harsh difficulties, it can still achieve the impossible. And for that, we'll be thanking God. But that was the perspective of this cantor, and that is the perspective that stands as rule number 3. I think Viktor Frankl says it best in Man's Search for Meaning. Let's read his reference, and then we'll go to rule number 4. Does anyone want to read the Viktor Frankl reference here? Please. Yes. Go ahead, Randy.
Everything can be taken from a man but one thing, the last of human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way.
Okay, good. Thank you. Now, rule number 4, I think is directly connected to rule number 1, 2, and 3. If rule number 1 is to grow in spite of the inconveniences, and to grow a step at a time, and then of course, to believe in our souls, in that infinite potential that we have that makes us grow each and every day, then we also have to know how to embrace our mistakes. What do I mean by that? I learned this from Abraham and Sarah. Abraham and Sarah says that their days were full. The verse says beautifully that even though they became old, and this is probably around the age of 110, they came into their days. Those are the words that the Torah uses. Ba'im bayamim. Came into their days. What does this mean? That they came into their days? Let's read the Zohar, the reference here from the foremost book of Kabbalah, about what it means, and let's speak about what it means to embrace our mistakes. What the verse is saying. Does anyone want to read this? Please. Yes, please.
What the verse is saying is that Abraham and Sarah were old, coming with all of their days. Abraham and Sarah did not only grow old, but rather they came with all their days. They showed up with each of their days. No day had to be forgotten and ignored. Each day was accounted for. Each day was lived to the fullest. Each day was wholesome, meaningful, complete. They came with all their days. Nothing, no day was left behind.
So each day was accounted for. They lived their days wholesomely. But it doesn't fit a basic fact that we know about Abraham. Abraham, for the first 70 years of his life, was a man who was searching. He went from religion to religion. He worshipped idols. He was a little lost. Can we say that a man like that lived his life to the fullest? Well, the first 70 years, he didn't really find his purpose there. So what is the Torah saying here? That he lived into his days, that not every day was accounted for. Sorry. But I think the message is so powerful, really very, very strong, and it speaks to one of the great secrets of life, and it's explained beautifully again by Rabbi Nachum Shneur said. Let's read this message and then develop this idea a little more, and then maybe we'll open this up. Does anyone want to read? Yes, please. Go ahead.
There is a very profound message here. Abraham and Sarah were not born in the environment of Torah. To the contrary, they were born and raised in ancient Ur, a city dominated by idolatry and the cult of kings as gods, in which the gods were perceived as bloodthirsty, jealous titans. Now, God, the real God, did not expect Abraham and Sarah to turn their lives upside down in a single day. People are not robots or computers. This is why the Torah tells us that Abraham and Sarah came with all of their days. From God's perspective, all of their days were perfectly wholesome. Of course, many of these years included theological blunders, but that was part of the search for truth.
Right, and I continue with this last passage, I think that brings the message home. Go ahead.
The same holds true for many of us. Many of our lives are filled with pit holes and ditches. We stumbled. We fell. Sometimes we look back at our story and feel dejected. We think that we have wasted so many years in vain. Nonetheless, these are experiences and days we can take along with us, as Abraham and Sarah did, because they are part of our relationship with the divine, because the road to perfection is paved with
imperfection. Thank you. Indeed, every mistake that we make is part of the construction of our life. We might say, I don't like this brick, it's broken, I'd rather not relate to it. This is an incident that happened to me, this is a mistake that I made, let me throw it out the window. But no, if we can embrace that mistake and learn from it, then our growth will be multifold. You know, there's a great story, and again, I don't know if this one is true also, but about the legendary CEO of IBM, Tom Watson, who once had an employee, they made a $10 million mistake. $10 million mistake. And the next day, this employee came to Watson's office and handed his letter of resignation. He said, look, I know you're going to fire me, so I'm out, will resign. I made a $10 million mistake. Tom Watson looks at him and says, you really think we'll fire you? We just spent $10 million educating you. How can we fire you? You're the most expensive employee we've had. We've invested all of this in education. But that's the way to view life. We have to look at our mistakes as part of that education of our lives. That's the only way to do it. You know, there's a beautiful, not to bore you too many texts here, but there's a beautiful idea in Judaism, another one, that speaks of how every mitzvah, every good deed has preparation to it. Every, what's called in Talmudic language, every mitzvah as a hechsher mitzvah, the preparation for the mitzvah. For example, you know, tzedakah, you give a coin to tzedakah, but there's a lot of preparation made to earn that coin and then to give it to tzedakah. Everything has a preparation stage to it. Tefillin, you prepare, you hide that skin of the cow and then you put it on. Whatever you think of the mitzvah, you'll see that there's a preparation. So they ask a good question. They say that there is a mitzvah, a good deed, called teshuvah, which means repentance or to return. That's what we do on Yom Kippur, on Rosh Hashanah. What's the preparation for that? What's the hechsher mitzvah for that? Sin. Sin prepares you for that mitzvah. So you see, sin is a part of the mitzvah itself. It's a very powerful idea, and I want to conclude with this reference here from Reish Lakish, who speaks of this big idea and says that this is why the power of returning is so strong. Because in his words here, for a person's intentional sins become like merits. Reish Lakish lived a very interesting life. He was a bandit before he became a sage. He was one of the great admired bandits of his time. He was a thief. He was known for his tremendous strength. One day, another sage by the name of Rabbi Yochanan finds him jumping from one side of a river to another side, a feat that not everyone could achieve. And he says to Reish Lakish, wow, you're such a strong man. You should use all of that strength to go and study and make something of yourself. Cheilcha leoraita, in the words of the Talmud, your strength should go to studying Torah. Reish Lakish said to Rabbi Yochanan, what are you going to give me if I do that? Rabbi Yochanan says, you see how handsome I am? My sister is much more beautiful. I'll convince her to marry you if that's what you do. He agreed. He eventually married the sister of Rabbi Yochanan and became one of the great sages. Why? Because there was one man with this one vision, that the mistakes that you made that build your strength to use it correctly can very well be used also in the other direction, for positivity, for learning, for being a scholar, for making an impact on Jewish history and on the world in general. That's the way we ought to view our mistakes, view ourselves. And I'll finish just with one last story. A great story. Again, I don't know if this one is true too. Should have checked my stories before coming tonight. But a story about a young child who was missing his left arm. Unfortunately, that's the way life goes sometimes. But his mother decided to treat him like a normal child. And she said, I also want you to go like your friends to go and study judo. So she brought him to a teacher, and the teacher said, fine, I'll take him in, but I can only teach him one trick. And he teaches him one trick. And after he taught him that trick, he goes back to the mother and says, that's it, I've taught him all I can teach him. Take him back. She said, no, please, keep him. He did the mother a favor, and he kept him. Now after 6 months, they had a big tournament. Now this boy wanted to participate in this tournament, but he only knew one trick. The teacher said to the mother, you know what, to do him a favor, I'll bring him to the tournament and he'll fight. He might lose his first fight, but at least he'll participate. He went to his first fight and he won. Second fight and he won. Third fight and he won. Quarterfinals he won. Semifinals he won. Finals, he won. No one could believe it. They went up to the teacher and said, what did you do with that child? He won everything. We would never believe that a child missing his left arm could win. And the teacher said, it's very easy. The trick that I told him is only defensible if the opponent grabs the person's left arm. No one could grab his left arm because he doesn't have one. So he won. And very often we look at our lives and we say we're missing a left arm. We're missing maybe an emotional, spiritual left arm. Something's not right. We made too many mistakes. But we have to know that these mistakes actually are there as educational experiences. They are there to make us win the game called life. And if we can only grow one step at a time, believe in ourselves, and ensure that we embrace our mistakes, we will face victory on our deathbeds until 120. Amen. Amen. Okay.